Hi, it's Mike Stephenson here. Today we're going to talk about business activity monitoring and using it with Azure Data Factory. So if we think about our integration platform, and we've got all the different types of resources that we have that make up Azure integration services. So if you're doing stuff with Data Factory, you're likely to be in this ETL, ELT sort of area where you're going to be moving around big data sets between databases, between storage accounts and that kind of thing. Um, this is where Data Factory fits, and companies are going to be building Data Factory pipelines to move data around, but there's very little visibility of these pipelines and what they're doing and if they were successful to anybody outside of the Data Factory experts. So we're going to look at how we can use BAM with Data Factory to create visibility so that people can get confidence that your Data Factory solutions work well and lower that cost of ownership. So the challenge that's fundamental to Azure, which Serverless 360 attempts to address, is this challenge of support. So Azure is a great platform to build solutions. When it comes to the runtime and support of them, we find that support users and business users don't have a lot of access, visibility, or the solutions are just too complicated for them to do anything with. So all of your support ends up heading over to the developer and the Azure expert, and they end up spending more time fixing things and dealing with support issues that can't be offloaded for the support team to deal with. So that stops your experts and your developers building new solutions because they're dealing with a support burden. So in Serverless 360, we have the four modules that we have. We've got business apps for day-to-day operations, cost analyzer for helping you develop a cost-focused culture to make sure you spend money efficiently. Document is about generating documentation to help meet your compliance requirements and do good governance. And the one we're talking about today is business activity monitoring, which is aimed at providing the ability to manage at a higher abstraction. So instead of managing a technical component, we can manage a business process. So something like the library data sync or something like an order process, something like that. Using Serverless 360, the aim is to shift support left. So we have the business activity monitoring module, over here, and we've got the business applications module in the middle. And these are tools that can be used by your level 1, level 2 support teams and also by business users. So down here for business users, BAM can open up self-service opportunities so they can troubleshoot problems with the interfaces that are core to their business functions. They can do things like reprocessing, and it just gives them a better experience, reduces the number of support tickets you get, and hopefully that'll just help you create great integration solutions. So business activity monitoring has a few main features. So predominantly we're about the ability to track what's happening in your integrations, whether it be a logic app, an API, or a pipeline or something like that. So with the ability to track what's happening, we can then build monitoring solutions so we can track the execution of a business function rather than just the execution of a technical component. We can then check if things are happening, if there's been any errors. We can create dashboards so we can see what's going on, and it really gives you those tools to develop day-to-day monitoring and management capabilities. In the example project we're going to look at, the requirement for this Data Factory solution is that we have branch offices who will submit data files to an SFTP server at head office, and then on a daily basis we're going to have Data Factory will load those batch files into a reporting database. So that's going to look something a bit like below. So we've got the end user here who's got a Power BI solution. They depend on this SQL database, and if they don't know that the data got loaded, their reports might seem out of sync. And the first thing they're going to do when the data doesn't look right is raise a support ticket to say, did we get today's files? Did we? Has there been any problems? So we build our Data Factory pipeline over here, and it's going to query the SFTP server, get the files and load them into the SQL database. Now, the problem we have is this person over here has no visibility of the pipelines. they don't really know if there was any errors. They just know the data doesn't look right. So that's quite a big problem. So the idea is that with Data Factory, we can publish events to BAM to say, have we processed a file? What was the outcome of processing the file? And maybe some metadata about it. So if the person over here, there's two ways this can happen. Either one, the person over here can see their data doesn't look right, so they can go to BAM and they can have a look and say, did today's pipelines run? So with a very small amount of training, you could show a sort of semi-technical business business super user the ability to say, did my pipeline run? So they can straight away see if the pipeline's still running, they know to maybe wait till it's finished. If the pipeline had an error, they'd be able to see that and they know why the data might not be right. Now, Serverless 360 can do two things. So if there's an error, we could have alerts go to the business user, and we could also have a support user over here could get an alert to step in and do something if the pipeline gets an error. Or there might be scenarios where maybe two of their branch officers submitted their file, but one of them didn't. So we can write queries in BAM to check for how many files we've received and files from different partners and stuff like that. And we could actually monitor to see somebody didn't submit a file, so there could be a problem. So there's a lot of things we can do in this this kind of scenario here. Here we are over in the Serverless 360 portal. So we're looking at business activity monitoring here, and you can see that my tree view on the left here shows the structure of how I want to manage my business processes. The branch office integration is part of my IT department, so I can go into this process here, and I've basically defined two transactions with a transaction designer. So the designer's aiming to give you a simplified view of a more complex implemented process. So in the Data Factory, there might be quite a lot of steps in it. Maybe all I want to do in this case is just show something really simple like, did it start, did it finish, or I can have intermediate steps if I want, and I can just draw these out in the designer. So for the interest of today's video, I'm going to skip over how you design a transaction. You can put properties and stuff in it, but we'll do separate videos looking into that in lower detail. But I've got one for the archiving of a file and one for the overall parent pipeline. And then what will happen is when I implement this in my Data Factory pipeline, I'll get events getting sent to the BAM API, which will start showing up in the track and runtime. So here you can see I've got a load of files that got ran just recently. I think if we go down to the bottom, we'll see there's a job ran today, which is my move files pipeline. So you can see here the properties of the pipeline itself I've captured in the message here. So I've basically sent a message telling me what the name of the pipeline, its run ID and stuff like that. I can promote these in BAM so that I can see these show up here as the ID and the name of the pipeline, and then the archive transactions just inside a loop in that pipeline, but I can see I've got the individual file names and stuff. So I can see all of the files we've received that have been processed by this pipeline. And I can click one, open it up. I could see some metadata here. If I wanted to, I could save a copy of the file content to BAM, but I think in this case, because we're just archiving the files in the real world, they'd probably be, potentially really giant files that you would want to maybe just keep in your data lake. But I can see which file it's processed, where the locations were. And this just gives me an easy way as a business super user. I can come in and I can troubleshoot, what happened to this file here, so we could, see if it had an error getting processed. We can maybe promote properties like which partner it came from or something like that. I can do things like up here, if I had an error, it would show up in the action required tab, so it gives me an easy way to manage errors. And I can see things like if I've ignored them because they've got sorted out some other way, I can configure options to reprocess if you maybe wanted to have some kind of way of sending a file back to get reprocessed. So we've got things like the ability to push a file back to an SFTP site, might be something you would use in this scenario. And so tracking's all about the management of these individual transactions. Now, the question at this point is, how do we get these transactions to show up from Data Factory? So over in my Data Factory, if I go to my pipeline, and you can see here I'm using the web activity. So basically what I'm doing is I'm making an HTTP call to the BAM API so I can send some data to it. So I'm going to configure the URL for BAM, which you would get from Serverless 360. So you'd get a URL and an authentication key. So I can configure them as headers, and then I can have the message body. So in this case, I'm just specifying some properties from the pipeline. I could also supply a header if I chose to as well. So that would be how you'd configure metadata and a message body to go to BAM if you wanted to. You can see here I've got things like the trigger name and that kind of thing. And then you just specify properties on the HTTP call. So do you want to archive the message? What's the name of the business process? Is the transaction complete? Which stage is it? So the stage would match up to a shape on my diagram. So over here at the bottom we've got pipeline started, so that would come from this stage status. And then what I'm doing is that would start my transaction. Then as I go through my process, I might do an update to BAM. So here I'd be doing a checkpoint call. So we have three operations on the BAM API. We've got start transaction, checkpoints, really an update of the status of that transaction, and then checkpoint with correlations for more advanced asynchronous scenarios where you might want to correlate data based on a business value as opposed to just a transaction ID. But here I'm just saying I've started my import. I can then do in the for each. You can see I've got some BAM activities here for each file, and then at the end I can, if it's a success or failure over here, I can indicate what happened to that transaction. So that's how easy it is to get BAM data going from Data Factory to Serverless 360. That gives us this track and trace capability here. So, just having visibility outside of the Data Factory expert of your pipelines, and if they were successful, is a really big win. We can then do things like create a dashboard. So we'll get an out of the box dashboard, and we can then customize it if we've got other transactions and other queries that we want to build. So one of the things you might do over here is you might build a custom query. So you can use our designer and configure, which properties that you want to monitor based on, and do a custom query. You can then use those queries in widgets that you might want to build, and these widgets are click through as well. So if I wanted to click through and see, that they're the instances that were successful, so you can do some quite cool stuff on this dashboard. We then also have monitoring over here, so I can configure duration monitor. So here I've said if my archive pipeline runs for more than 10 minutes, raise a warning; longer than 20, raise an error. So it's really easy to watch for things that might be taking too long. If any of my transactions got an error, I can raise alerts here. So I can ping an alert out if say one of the files had an error. And then finally, I've got query monitoring where I can say, look, have we processed? If we process less than 3 transactions a day, we might have an error. If we process less than 1, we've definitely got an error. So we can raise alerts when things aren't happening, and we can step in and troubleshoot what's going on. We also have notification channels, so you can configure notifications via email, Teams, ServiceNow, tickets, DevOps work items, and a whole bunch of other stuff that you can create notifications with. And that really is an overview of how you would configure BAM monitoring for a data factory. Okay, so let's have a quick summary of what we've looked at. So the key points are, with business activity monitoring, we can centralize the business and operations of the solution, which allows for self-service by support and business users. So in Azure, we tend to find that the Azure Integration Service solutions are a very decentralized model. So we've got deployment of different resources, different data factories, logic apps, etc., all over the place. By creating this centralized view with business activity monitoring, it can help your support and business users be able to see the big picture and to see what goes on across your integration estate. We've got features like track and trace, action required, repair and resubmit, which are the common things that you would need to do to troubleshoot any problems. You can create dashboards which let you sort of see how things are going across a period of time. So maybe you have like a weekly, daily view, stuff like that, and you can see if things are working successfully. We've then got failure monitoring, query monitoring, and duration monitoring. So we can start telling people that there's something not going well, and we can sort of jump in and have a user respond and correct things if needs be, rather than just wait until a support ticket gets raised. So with Serverless 360, today we talked about Data Factory over here, but also you can use Serverless 360's BAM from a whole bunch of other resources. So you've got Logic Apps, API Management, Synapse, Power Automate, Functions, and BizTalk. You could also use it from other tools if it was custom code, if it was some third-party vendor product that can do HTTP calls, you could do that. We've done stuff with SAP BTP before, which works quite well. So there's lots of different ways you can take advantage of Serverless 360. Thank you for listening to today's video. We hope you enjoyed this session about Data Factory with Business Activity Monitoring.